I've known Don for a long time, more than 20 years. He's former Cru staff. We both used to do campus ministry in Southern California. He was on staff with Cru for 15 years, so in the late 90s. So I've known him for quite a long time. And so Don is a licensed MFT, as I said. He's also a certified sexual addiction therapist and graduate of UC Riverside. Been married to Erin since 2000. We both got married in the same year, Don. He has a son and a daughter. And I guess the last thing is I just know Don loves the Lord. And so we're blessed to have him today. And he's tremendous at what he's done. He's also, I guess the last thing I'll say is the co-founder of the Soul Restoration Project in Long Beach. So I won't go into that. I'm guessing he'll share some, but go ahead and Google it. It is a place that's doing a lot of good in the community there. And then Susette, actually, I think this is the third time we've had Susette speak and do some trainings with us. She's amazing. She's a graduate of Azusa Pacific. She also lives in Long Beach, has a husband and a new puppy named Roxy. I wonder if we'll get to see a picture of Roxy. She specializes in kind of two areas. One is just working with Christians from all kinds of different backgrounds. And then also working with people who have experienced betrayal in relationships, including infidelity and porn addiction and stuff. So this subject today is definitely in both of their wheelhouses. And so we're excited to have them. One other thing is you can use the chat for Q&A, but I want to let you know, like, try to hold off on that or hold your questions, maybe put them in the chat. But the last time at 10:30, we will have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So just know that it's coming. You'll get a chance to ask questions at the end. All right, Don and Susette, I will hand it off to you guys and welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. And I think I'm starting us off.
You're starting us off? Okay, hit it.
Yeah, let me put my screen so we can get started and share that. Let's see.
I'll say something about us, Don. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Don and I met, I don't know how long ago, but when he was becoming licensed and I was starting private practice, maybe like 8-9 years ago, maybe. And he, every good networking opportunity I've ever had came straight from Don Diva. I don't know if he knows that, but Don's pastor and I did a podcast for a few years. Don is my landlord. I rent office space from him and his co-founder at SRP, Catherine Morrill, and every good thing comes from the Lord, and every good, nice opportunity tends to come from Don Diva for me. So, and Don and I have done a lot of work where we work with couples together. And so we've done like numerous therapy sessions together and stuff. So hopefully like we have a good flow in this presentation, like we try to have in our couple sessions.
Right.
Too. And a lot of laughter, even though it's a hard subject.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Susette. I love working with you, and I'm glad that we're office mates.
Me too.
Friends. And thanks also, Tom. And have fondly enjoyed my time at Cru with college students. I wish I could see the people that were that's come and maybe later. This is kind of my first time doing a workshop with a PowerPoint, and it's so hard to not be able to see people. Mm-hmm. Let's get started a little bit, and here we go. Let me put, that's a picture of my family, my wife, Erin, and Nicole and Ryan. I'm actually currently in another training, getting my certification into multiple addictions. Actually in the moment, in this weekend, we're learning about drug and alcohol and the other gambling and gaming and all the other addictions.
Good.
Yeah, so it's been a very full and rich time. Mm-hmm. I've been married for 20 years, and love working as a counselor and also in this area and this subject of recovering from sexual addiction and the betrayal that happens in I think as we get started in the importance of this topic, I just think about it and this topic and how the enemy and his cunningness and his desire to pollute what God has intended for pleasure has really taken sexuality and perverted it for his purposes. I think sex, which is supposed to be the ultimate act of marital commitment, full of pleasure, healing, and joy, has become for many an act of self-gratification. Whatever seems pleasing or whoever we want, whenever we want, has become the norm of this age. And in a way, commitment is not even a word that we understand, right? Multiple sex partners, pornography, compulsive masturbation, and addiction to lust has become more and more the norm of a culture whose center is pleasure and not God. And so I think the importance of what we're talking about today is really what we, Susette and I, deal in in the rooms and helping people recover from sexual addiction and the impact of it. So maybe let me shift to talking about some of the logistics. The PowerPoint that we have today will be made available, so you don't have to take so much notes and be able to pay more attention. We want to have you hold on to your questions towards the end. If you want to put questions on the chat so that you don't forget or write them down, we'll have a time to do a question and answer.
Can I say something too, Don? If
So,
you guys want to ask an anonymous question that's too scary to ask to the whole group, I mean, feel free to, I think this is function is set up, but Young, you can tell us, feel free to chat directly to Young Lee, or you can send a question to me directly if you want, and we hold secrets for a living, so I promise we will keep your identity confidential, but sometimes we have questions that we need answered that it's too scary to ask with a face and a name on it, and those are usually the questions that everyone needs the answer to. So be brave with that.
Good. So I'm actually turning it over to you, Susette, and
okay.
Introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure. So yes, and Tom pretty much got the facts. So I'm a marriage and family therapist. I went to Azusa Pacific for my undergrad and graduate work. I've been married for 12 years. It's getting up in the numbers where I have to think about it. My husband is a high school history teacher for LAUSD. I started my career working with, we didn't call it inner city, we call it community mental health, but basically like inner city kids in South LA and East LA. I worked with foster kids, and then worked in schools in East LA for about 4 years before I started private practice. And then in private practice went into working with betrayal. And in the last 5 years, I've been really falling in love with spiritual formation and neuroscience, and how God, through prayer, connection with him, and over time can help us to rewire our brain. So I love talking about that. So I can talk about that all day, but let's move to pornography. So we're going to start talking today with some facts about pornography. Oh, I do have a brand new puppy named Roxy. She is 12 weeks old tomorrow, and she's killing me, you guys. She bites. She's very stressed out, and we're working on developing good emotional attachment. And it's stressful when a therapist gets a puppy, because I think about her emotional well-being too much, but she's really cute. So, I think she's going to be a good dog, and hopefully a good therapy dog. Okay, so I want to talk about pornography, and we're going to run down some facts for you, and some data. In 2013, the average age of first exposure to pornography was around 11 years old. 25% of search engine requests are pornographic. roughly 68 million per day. So yeah, that's a big number. 12% of all internet websites are pornographic. 34% of internet users experience unwanted exposure to pornography. So you might get like a pop-up ad or like misdirection. It says you're going someplace and it ends up sending you somewhere else to porn. In terms of people, 20% of men watch porn at work, 13% of women. So you're going to notice with these stats that the numbers for women are maybe a little bit lower, but women watching porn is a very real, it's a reality. And it's a little bit more shameful, I think, than it is for men. So I would even say that these numbers are low. 9 out of 10 users only access free porn. 1 out of 5 mobile searches are for pornography. 24% of smartphone owners admit having pornographic material on their device. Dawn, I assume that means like saved images, right? Or saved videos on their device. Do you know about that?
Yes.
Okay. And then a large consumer of internet porn is the 12 to 17-year-old age group. Those are some young people. Pornography in the church. 50% of Christian men admit that they're addicted to porn. 20% of women, again, I assume that's the women that admit it and the men that admit it. 75% of pastors are not held accountable for their own internet use. And yet 51% of pastors admit internet porn is a temptation. Let's assume that that's a low number. 50% of men, 20% of women claim that they're addicted to porn. So what is being done in your church and my church to help them? Do Kevin, Don. Do Kevin from Home Alone. Let's talk a little bit about sex in the Bible. One of my favorite topics. So 2 of my favorite topics, sex and the Bible. Okay. How often is sex mentioned in the Bible? Roughly 254 times. Here's an example of how the Bible talks about sex. She laid with him. He laid with her. He knew his wife. He took her. She pleased Samson well. He loved a woman. He loved a virgin, whore, a harlot, a concubine. The word homosexuality is used. Sexual body parts, fornication, learned to control his body in a holy and honorable way, and more. And now we get to the good stuff. The Song of Solomon, which is about a husband and wife. When's the last time you heard a sermon on the Song of Solomon? Dawn's making me read the passages. Here we go. I'm not a good actress, just so you know. Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verses 2-4 says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Your name is like a perfume poured out. No wonder the maidens love you. Take me away with you. Let us hurry. Let my king bring me into his chambers." It's very romantic. Song of Solomon chapter 4:16 says, "Awake, north wind, and come, south wind. Blow on my garden, that its fragrance may spread abroad. Let my lover come into his garden and taste its choice fruits." So we see in the Song of Solomon that they're both kind of explicit about their sexual experience and also romantic and poetic about it. So what? If sex and sexuality are mentioned over 250 times in the Bible, why aren't we talking about it more in church? And I know there was like kind of a trend in the 2000s about male pastors saying like how hot and sexy their wives are from the stage, but that was kind of the most it was hit, you know? I know Mark Driscoll did that a lot, talk about a sexy wife on stage, but he didn't like talk about the morality and the experience of sexuality. So how many times do we think alcohol is mentioned in the Bible? It's roughly 247 times. There's many more sermons on alcohol than there are about sex. Why? Because pastors are uncomfortable with the topic themselves. So when we don't talk about something, what message is shared? What message is communicated to congregants when we avoid the topic of sex? It could be like, don't ask your church or your pastor or your parents about sex. Don't talk about it. It's not that important. Or we're uncomfortable with the topic of sex. or that sexual desire should be latent, that it should be something that's not big and important in your life. And if it is important or strong in your life, then you are wrong or dirty or shameful or out of control. So shame versus guilt. I had something to add, but I'm gonna stay on track. Shame versus guilt. What's the difference between experiencing shame and feeling guilt? Shame means I am wrong, I am broken, I've gone too far, there's no hope for me. There's nothing about this that will change. It's over, it's done. I just might as well give up on whatever thing we feel ashamed of. And guilt means I did something wrong. And guilt, I like in our Christian communities, we talk about conviction. Conviction goes with guilt. So shame is about the being, the self. It's who we are in the deepest level. We experience shame, and guilt is the action or the behavior. Conviction is about behavior. When God convicts us, he brings us to a hopeful place where we can change our behavior and do something different. So it's a really subtle difference. And I know we talk more about the difference now in the last 10 years because of Brené Brown and shame became trendy, but it's an important thing for us to talk about, because even the more we talk about shame, I know for me, it's something that I uncover in my life, in my heart, in my kind of in my gut every week, at least, where I go, oh, I feel shame about this. I need to name it. And an important thing about shame, if I can neuroscience-ly nerd out on you guys for a second, is shame is without language. So shame is something that we feel deep in our body. Even to talk about it helps us to be less subject to it. It has less power over us as we talk about it. That's why therapists are talking about it so much in the last 10 years, because we find when we identify it and speak it out loud, it loses some of its power over us. So we no longer feel like we're broken or irreparable.
If I could add, Susette, just really quick, that really in the area of addiction, whether it's sex addiction or any kind of addiction, that really they say that shame is the emotional machinery that keeps the addiction going.
Yeah. I love emotional machinery. What a great term.
It really, yeah. It's
great descriptor.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we pray for God to remove, and as I shared, I'm a spiritual formation person. I love that. And I love talking about prayer and how powerful prayer is. So this is not to minimize the power of prayer. However, we tend in our culture to think that just praying for God to remove this is the only thing that we can do. And I think it's the word just that bothers me in those topics. So frequent advice that we get is that we should just pray for God to remove our struggle with sex. So if I just pray for God to make this better, for him to remove it from me, for him to heal me, what message do I end up believing if nothing changes? If I'm not healed, what message do I end up believing? I must be broken. I should be ashamed of myself. God must not love me. If God can't help me, no one can. And I am beyond repair here. So you see that shame language there. And so if I'm coming to my church leadership, continuing to confess, and my church leaders say, just pray about it. I go home, I pray, I continue to act out. I, at some point, begin to believe that I'm not worthy of being healed, or that it's irreparable inside of me. And in that moment, trying harder does not always work. And in addiction language, Don, correct me if I'm wrong, but in addiction language, that's like a white knuckling. It means I'm just trying harder, my knuckles get white.
Yep.
All right, Don, hit it. You're up.
Yeah, thanks, Susette. I think, just the encouragement to just try harder, pray harder, or sometimes do more quiet times. It seems lacking, right? In understanding the struggle. So let's talk a little bit about addiction 101. And as part of becoming a therapist, even in my story of coming to know the Lord. One of the most impactful people in my life was my therapist after college, and yeah, and I came to him because I had problems with pornography and compulsion at that point, and was addicted to porn. Was exposed to porn at an early age. I think I was about 9, and it created this this way that I learned to cope with negative feelings. You know, whether when I was feeling lonely, or I was disappointed, or I got a bad grade at school. It was a way that I learned unconsciously at that point that was something that I could go to make me feel better. And so once I got to college, you know, and life happens, and there's a lot of heartache and issues that happen, that it just became a problem more and more. And so, yeah, it became a big addiction for me. Let's talk a little bit about addiction, and to give you a running definition. This is in the DSM-5. What an addiction is? It's an maladaptive pattern of substance use to clinically significant impairment or distress. Substance use as manifested by 3 or more of the following occurring at any time in the same 12 months. So that's how DSM is defining addiction. Maladaptive pattern of substance, just meaning an unhealthy pattern of using whatever substance you're using, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, porn. And so these are the different criterias that we use: tolerance, withdrawal, taken in larger or longer amounts, or over a longer period of time than was intended, the desire or unsuccessfully attempt to limit or stop the use, large amount of time spent acquiring substance, social, occupational, or recreational activities sacrificed to obtain, continued use despite negative consequences, either physical, emotional, or social. So to follow that up, it's really any substance or behavior that has increased amount of use for the same effect, experiences anxiety when it's absent, that you use it more and or longer than intended, right? Attempted to stop but unable, more time spent using or obtaining, when it starts affecting your work, your school, your family, and your friends, and it's causing significant harm to one's life, psychologically, emotionally, physically, or even spiritually. You know, I think what when I see people in my office, and as I've worked with people, the pattern that I see is that there's this way that they, you know, got exposed to porn early on in their life. Something maybe significant happens in their life, whether they lost their job, or they broke up with their girlfriend, their boyfriend, and the porn use becomes has increased, and then when they try to stop, that there's these anxiousness that happen, and then also the porn use also, you know, they're spending a lot more hours than intended, and then it also affects school or work because they're staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning watching it. You know, they're late to things, and that's the same with alcohol, right? But specifically today, we're talking about sex and porn. So So what can be an addiction? So substances are things that we can be addicted to. Drugs, alcohol, nicotine, even caffeine. That's pretty a norm and very accepted. But also there's these things that we call them clinically process. Where it's sex, work. It could be gambling. It could be video games. Shopping, or you can even be addicted to anger or social media, and the list goes on and on. I want to talk a little bit about what the difference between substance and process. For many years, process addictions were rejected as true addictions, for no substance really entered into one system. But what about when you think about a runner's high, right? Or the rush of pleasure from eating a hamburger, right? Or ice cream. Or a boost because you found a bargain. I really like finding a bargain. Yeah, what about the 5 chemicals that's also involved in orgasm? So if natural chemicals releases are abused for their pleasure, we can really trick our bodies for a release, which can become an addiction. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between habituation, of something that's just a habit, and addiction. So they say that habits take 21 days to create. You're doing your morning devotions, you're journaling regularly, you're waking up without coffee, you're walking for 15 minutes in the morning. So habituation can be changed with support, a clear plan, and a short amount of time. And remember the addiction criteria that you tried, but you can't stop. Right, and many habituation are unable to stop because they don't have the helpful resources. What we found is that 3 out of 5 people struggling with pornography don't see a therapist, and they use the community support, a church support, with the 12 step, and a clear plan will help. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about sex addiction, and what created the pornography epidemic. And there's this thing that called the 3 A's of internet pornography specifically: the accessibility of it, affordability, and the anonymity. Accessibility. When I was growing up, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, you had to go to Blockbuster or to a liquor store to find porn magazines, rent porn video. And so with, the birth of the internet, you have access to it, 24/7. The affordability of it, it's, I think they said 9 out of 10 porn users use free porn, and so it's free, right? You don't have to pay for it anymore. And then in the anonymity, you don't have to go anywhere, right? And you can be anonymous in your own room, and that's really what has started the epidemic in pornography. And let's talk about how this happened really quickly. In 2005, the average porn star's income was $115,000. When in 2007, Adobe Flash was invented, and so the result was this huge influx of no-cost amateur porn. And so free online porn became rampant around 2007. That started. And then if you look at it in 2012, only 7 years later, the average porn star's income lowered to $8,000, right? So 90% online porn users only view porn, free porn. So let's talk a little bit about the internet porn and the crack cocaine porn of it. The endless options that you have, the constant new stimuli, the continual chemical release in the brain. We could talk of how much the brain is affected. I talk about it in recovery, and if I'm seeing someone who's addicted to porn, that what happens is your prefrontal cortex, where it's the judgment seat in our brain where we make decisions, it becomes impaired, and wires get crossed, and you're not able to make decisions because it's become an addiction. And so they say that it takes 90 days to allow your brain to heal and to give your body a break. And that's part of the recovery. But the chemicals also that the release, the dopamine and the oxytocin, there's a lot more research there now, really says that porn is like crack cocaine. You have the same effect. And so what's so bad about porn? We can, there's a lot of religious beliefs against sexual immorality, but let's talk about the results of pornography use a little bit. If we were meeting face to face, I would ask you what you thought about it. Maybe you can put it in the chat. But here are some of the results that have studies have shown, and I see it anecdotally. The partner or the spouse seems less attractive to photographical enhanced men and women. Courtship and romancing, the partner's spouse decreases, and sex becomes only the important act. Pleasure from child's hugs become insignificant to a constant life of the heightened arousal and the release of porn. Opposite sex becomes an object of pleasure and not a person, that the partner becomes objectified. Isolation from increased time spent on addiction, the time to become isolated, and relations suffer and fade back from lack of interaction. Prolonged exposure to sexual activities, conversations begin to include sexual and crude jokes become as a result. And so, this is what happens when porn use becomes unmanageable. I want to stop and we want to move on to how it affects spouse or partners and the betrayal they feel. So I'm going to turn it over to Susette.
This is my favorite subject. So as we talk about spousal betrayal, I want to say that I'm going to shorthand accidentally and call everybody that's betrayed someone an addict. And that's not true. but we do kind of use this shorthand when we work with like Don's certification for certified sex addiction therapist. Everyone that Don works with that's betrayed someone is not necessarily an addict too. There's criteria that he uses to assess it, but just wanted to say that because I know I'm going to slip. So I became passionate helping people with betrayal. Both actually probably the first time Don and I had a networking coffee or lunch when we first met, he told me about his goals to go in to be a certified sex addiction therapist. And I, at the time, had quite a couple friends who were going through a betrayal themselves. And I realized like, this is something I'm really passionate about, helping people to recover when they've been hurt in a way that they don't understand. Because betrayal really makes you feel like you have lost your life in a lot of ways. When you discover something out of the blue, you thought everything in your marriage was okay, or at least good enough. And then you discover a big secret, which often happens when someone is a sex addict. So we're just going to talk about it really quick. In the past, a thing that's important to know about spouses of addicts or people that have been in a relationship with someone that has acted out sexually. That's why we shorthand it to addicts. So when you're a spouse of an addict, in the beginning of like Sex Anonymous, SA, they would call everyone who was married to an addict a codependent. That was a big deal back in the day. That's not how we look at it now, but that's how we looked at it back then. So the only opportunity for women and men who were married to addicts and had just discovered infidelity, they would have to go to groups called codependents of sex addicts. And codependence basically means that you have enabled or helped a system of addiction. I've fed a system of addiction. And that's not really fair to spouses that just uncover a secret that something's been going on with their spouse all this time. They may have known that something was a little bit wrong, but it doesn't mean that you fed a cycle of addiction. Okay. We don't want to blame you without really assessing it and giving you a chance to figure out what pain you've gone through. Another thing that happened with spouses of addicts in the church setting is that that the spouse could be shamed because the husband's sexual needs weren't being met. So picture like a faith leader, a pastor or someone, and I love pastors. I grew up in church. I trust my pastors, good people. But let's assume there's a pastor that's struggling with their own sexual relationship with their spouse, okay? Or their own porn addiction or something. And a couple comes to them and says that we just found out this secret. My husband's been hiding this from me. And the wife says, I need help. I need help. I don't know what to do. What should I do? I don't want to divorce him, but I can't let this go on either. What should I do? And at times, church leaders would say something like, well, are you having enough sex with him? Are his sexual needs being met? Maybe he acted out of the marriage because you weren't taking care of him in the marriage. You know, the Bible says that you should be available sexually to each other. Have you been sexually available to him? So there's this subtle or not subtle blame shifting that has happened in the past for spouses that discover infidelity or addiction. What we're trying to do now is something different. We're trying to look at a betrayal from a trauma perspective. So when a spouse discovers a secret that their partner has been holding all this time, I first like to sit down with them and assess how they're doing, how their trauma is, if they're having any traumatic reactions to it. Because if I'm a wife that thinks that everything's fine in my marriage or good enough, and then I find out that my husband has been acting out in a way where he has a whole other life, I will feel like I've lost fidelity in my marriage, and I will feel like I have lost part of my partner, who my husband is in my world. So there's a big loss to that, and it can feel like my marriage as I knew it is over, and there's trauma that comes from that. Okay, so the first thing that we do is we help to identify emotions that come up with that, and with the emotions, the emotional reactions. So emotions are something that we experience. Emotional reactions are something that we do on behalf of the emotions. Here's the difference. I get angry. I feel angry. That's an emotion. I punch somebody in the face. That's the reaction. So they're two different things. There's a difference between what I feel and what I do punch on its behalf. I help my clients and people that work with betrayal. We help our clients to look at how the emotional reaction affects our behaviors towards our spouse. Is my anxiety make me check their location every 5 minutes or look at their phone whenever they're not in the room? Does my anger make me yell at them in ways that isn't beneficial? Does my sadness make me withdraw from my spouse and from my kids? And without any shame, we just take a look at it and we see how we can get that person to feel more like they can function again, help them to heal over the course of time. Okay, so basically we're taking care of your heart first, and then how your behaviors are affecting your life and what's impairing your life. And then we begin to look at, with all that, actually, we begin to look at boundaries, how to define trust and how to rebuild trust, which is a process. And some of this, a CSAT, like Dawn's specialty, is trained in walking these clients through what's called a full disclosure. So sometimes the spouse that's been betrayed needs the addict to tell the whole story of what their addiction has contained, so that the spouse can hear, this is the reality of the world that you were living in when I was not invited into that part of your mind and part of that of your behaviors. Here's the full story of the secrets that I've been keeping. And that is a difficult process that for us, it takes a couple months. Dawn and I have walked quite a few couples through that, but it is something that's really valuable, really painful, and really valuable because it gets everything out on the table and it helps you to restart with the whole story. Let me saying that I do not recommend for pastors to do disclosures like in their office with couples. It's really something, especially with addiction, that Dawn and I recommend, and CSATs, the sex addiction therapists, recommend that it's done in a more formal process. There's a few ministries that do disclosures. Okay. But often without it being held in a way where, like, Dawn will meet with someone for a month or two and help them to define their whole story. Sometimes addicts have kind of blank memories in terms of what they've done to act out because the justification has been so thick and so heavy. And so they've kind of moved it out of their consciousness. So it takes Dawn some time to get the whole story out. The reason why we say we don't recommend everybody to do disclosures is because a staggered disclosure is what we call it, or a disclosure where just a little bit is told at a time can rewound the spouse. The spouse deserves the whole story. And because of how addiction affects the brain, it takes time to get the whole story out of the addict. Sometimes because their own denial, sometimes because they don't want to say it out loud and they're trying to keep the secret, and sometimes because they don't remember until they've done some work. You have anything to add to that, Dawn?
No, it's great.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so once the trauma symptoms have begun to improve with the spouse, then we can move into a place where we start to evaluate the spouse for codependency. So notice, like, I'm not putting a stamp of codependency on the spouse. Oh, my phone's ringing. That never happens. Okay. Let me just turn on. So I don't put a stamp of codependency on someone before we've done a good evaluation and before I know what their pain is, because this kind of trauma makes people do crazy things, but that's not who they are. So we try to evaluate and calm down the trauma reaction first, and then we begin to evaluate for codependency or past trauma that's affecting the current relationships. Sometimes if there's like a bunch of childhood trauma, it can affect how a spouse treats the addict, and it makes the system worse instead of helping the addict to get better. But like I said, all of that is after I've done some work to help them to recover from the current trauma, because otherwise we don't really know what we're working with in terms of long-term stuff. Yeah. And here's some things that can help with that part. Individual therapy, of course, Dawn and I recommend that because we're individual therapists, but therapy is one. COSA group, which is the Codependence of Sex Addicts group, even though I said that term wasn't cool to stamp everyone with. COSA groups are actually a really cool form of 12-step. Clients of mine that have done COSA have done a lot of really, really good work. And Celebrate Recovery in the Christian world is what we call kind of 12-step light, where we're hoping that you're doing a 12-step program that's more intense and more focused, but Celebrate Recovery helps you to join the 12-step work that you're doing with Christians, faith, and Jesus and scripture. Celebrate Recovery is a very cool program to integrate scripture and the biblical truth of who God is and his love for us into 12-step. 12-step is a foundational biblical thing. We just kind of had to separate the Bible from it so that it was available for everyone that wasn't ready for the Bible, but Celebrate Recovery clicks it back in together. And then once we've done more and more work to stabilize the addict, stabilize the spouse so that each of them feel like they're feeling more functional, like their life is moving, they feel hope, they feel like they can recover from this, then we usually begin couples counseling, because it's only then when trust can really be rebuilt and a couple can sit in front of a therapist and engage in a truthful conversation kind of on the same level. That's why Don and I often meet with couples together, where I'm meeting with my client, Don's meeting with his client. We have each of their backs and we can advocate for them in session if they need to have a couples conversation, because in front of one couples counselor, you're basically requiring everybody to be on the same level in terms of trust, and you end up shaming one or enabling the other. We can talk more about that another day. That's probably a whole other presentation. Anything to add to that, Don?
Probably not at this time. I'm just aware. I mean, we could spend a whole hour talking about the trauma that happens and how do you build trust, with a spouse or partner that's been betrayed. So
you can tell which slide I added into the presentation too, because it's like super thick and small font. Okay, and then I had more to say. Okay, so how can the church be involved? Here's the church's responsibility. And in church, we also mean ministry leaders, right? Because so many people that are attending this presentation are doing kind of not church up in the pulpit, but a real church where you're meeting with people individually, you're connecting with people, you're building relationships in a different way, maybe than a traditional church. So the responsibility falls on you as faith leaders to set an example. If the Bible is glaringly outspoken about sex, if God committed an entire book to good, healthy, married, hot sexuality, like the Song of Solomon, then the church should be outspoken about it too. And the important goal for a church is to make sex a safe topic. And so therefore we have to feel like it's safe for us to talk about. And, I'm 40 years old. I was a teenager in the 90s. Purity culture was real. There was good and there was bad that came with purity culture. I grew up Baptist, not Southern Baptist, but American Baptist, but it's probably a whole other presentation too. But we did a program called True Love Waits. I got my purity ring, you guys. I gave it to my husband on our wedding night and I wore it, and my phone's still ringing. And we had like this whole training of the truth that if I abstained from sexuality before I was married, then my married sex life would be awesome. And that is a complex conversation as someone that does a lot of couples work and talks to a lot of couples about their sexuality. So this topic is dense and there's a lot to it. And I know why it's scary to talk about it in front of people. But I think it's important to ask yourself, am I comfortable talking about sex and sexuality with people in my church or in my community as a faith leader? Are there experiences in my past that I feel shame about or guilty that are influencing my behaviors and how I talk about it today? So an example of that is back to the pastor that shames the wife for not having enough sex with her husband. If you're frustrated with your own wife, your own spouse about your sex life, you're going to be mad at other people's spouses too. It's just how it works. And of course, it's normal for a faith leader to be frustrated about their sex life with their spouse. That's a very normal thing. One of the top 3 things that we talk about in couples counseling is sex, money, and kids. Sexuality is something that needs to always be worked on, but we need to be in the process of working on it with our spouse, asking for help, confronting them, talking to people that are wiser than us, and connecting in a way that makes our sexuality healthier. It's something that we always need to be working on as people and as Christians. And so ask yourself, is there stuff in your past? Am I shameful or guilty regarding my current sexual behavior, or am I grieved about current sexual behavior? And how you come to a conversation with someone or how you come to the pulpit influences your message. And so it's important to accept and live your own story. It doesn't mean you talk about your sex life with your wife or your husband in front of the pulpit, but it means you know about it enough and you're open with a good enough amount of people that you feel like you are able to be honest with yourself and others. So how to broach the subject of sex? Be honest and straightforward. A lot of messages are being assumed today. I think especially with the church on social media and stuff, we think that there's a zeitgeist of conversation happening about sexuality. And I often think, why should I say something? People are already hearing it. But I don't think that's true. People that are in your congregations or people that you're a faith leader to need to hear from you, because your voice is the thing that's important to them. It's important to speak with humility and know we don't have all the answers, and saying, I don't know the answer to this goes a really long way, because so many people are confused when us as leaders are able to say, I don't know. It's something I've been praying about too. I really don't know. I always say, like, I can't wait to ask Jesus that later. I can't wait. I got to put it on the list of things to ask him. Saying you don't know enables people to be curious. It gives them permission to not know themselves and to be on a journey. And it's important for you as a faith leader, like I said, to be supported by others. You don't have to do this alone. Most people are in the same boat on this topic. And it's important to support people and encourage them to be in community environments where they can talk about their own sexuality. And the most important thing here is the doctrine of grace. We all have his grace and his mercy. We are invited to grow and learn and develop and change. And as we model that for our congregations and people that we're in leadership over, then they are given permission to grow and change. They don't have to be all good. They don't have to have their Sunday school clothes on in order to show up before the Lord. So here are some ways that you can help. You want to talk about sex and sexuality from the pulpit and stage. Start small. You don't have to know all the answers. Say from the front, I don't know the answer. My pastor says this from time to time, and it gives me the chills that he's inviting people to not know and to be curious. I just love that. And then work on your shame around sexual sin. We all have it. We all have shame around sexuality, I think. Maybe not all. 80% of people, 92% of people, whatever the score is, have shame around sexuality. Matthew 5:28 says that we have all sinned sexually. So it speaks to the fact that we've all sinned sexually. And so it's an important thing to know. Shame's going to come up inside of you. That's normal. That's part of being on this side of heaven. We need to identify the shame and speak it out loud, because when shame is in silence, it grows. And when it's in the light, the heat, the light kills it. I don't know, like algae, something like that. But the more we talk about shame, the less power it has over us, is the point, even though my metaphor wasn't good. Praying harder by yourself is often not the answer. I would say it's not the only answer. So starting with prayer and having a prayer life where you are in a confession space before God is a really important part of our daily or weekly life in our relationship with him. And we need more help. Prayer is not going to kill it. We need more help. We were created to be in community. We were created to have people that were wiser than us give us wisdom and give us hope. And so we need to continue to walk in community with people and not just pray in the dark about our shame. Here's some biblical examples of growth. Noah, Don, this is still me, right? Okay, yes. Okay, so Noah having faith and creating the ark in Genesis 6, he went through a whole developmental process with that where God led him. And then he fell off actually at the end and had a bunch of grief. I was talking to my pastors about this week, had a bunch of grief right after the flood, and then was able to recover again. Joseph and his brothers and Pharaoh in Genesis 37 through 46, Joseph went through this whole experience of being kind of a braggy dude that talked about how awesome he was going to be and how much power he was going to have over his brothers. And then as he developed, he became a man of God that was faithful, that was compassionate, and that helped his brothers and his family to recover. David and Jonathan in 1st and 2nd Samuel in their relationship. David and Bathsheba, David went through all this process where he sinned and he was confronted and then he confessed and then he grieved it. And through difficult situations, we grow in our relationship with God and with others. Here's one of my favorite developmental passages when it comes to spiritual formation. Romans 5:3-5 says, "Not only so, but we as glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame." I'm getting chills, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So we have hope. Why? Because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. We have love, we have power, and that helps us to battle the shame here. So challenges in our lives are opportunities for more faith in God, but also times to grow through struggle. And so I asked the question, what if you as faith leaders were, when you are feeling your own shame, your own triggers about sexuality, what if you were able to lean into it in community, to be in pain with people, and what if you were able to be curious about it so that you can work on developing your understanding of your own sexual shame?
Suzette, just because of time, do you mind if we move on to assessing for sexual addiction?
Go for it.
So great about, I think a chance for growth, that there's a difference between sometimes transformation and what was the other word? I'm blanking on it. It'll come back to me, but there's sometimes some growth that sometimes transformation happens right there and then, and God heals us, but sometimes growth happens long term.
It's either we're broken or we're fixed, right? Or we're moving down a process of continuing to heal.
We'll get you guys this PowerPoint, so you'll have all this information. So yeah, let's take a breath real quick and let's talk about assessing for sexual addiction as you're talking with your friends at church, people that you disciple. How do you assess? So simply ask is really the question. Sometimes it's even hard, when, somebody in your small group, I think it feels like a forward question when somebody's giving a prayer, a prayer request, and they're kind of not being very upfront. I think it's just okay to say, are you struggling sexually? Right. And obviously you want to make sure that you're doing that in the right context of maybe one-on-one and not in a group. But to be able to just ask. Another question is, has someone touched you inappropriately or touched your private areas? Or does your sexual behavior drive you? Is the couple of questions that that's not part of the PowerPoint. Is this the first time you're telling someone about this struggle, right? And just ask a lot of open-ended questions. Just tell me more about this, right? And you describe this. Can you tell me more about that? And as they're telling them these things to you, again, going back to shame, to tell them that they're okay. Because shame surrounds sexual sin more than any other sin, I believe, and we see that in our offices, and Satan and the enemy uses that all too well. People believe that they're broken or wrong because they can't stop, as we were talking about, that they prayed so long and they couldn't stop. I have someone I was working with that they started believing that they weren't a Christian, right? Or they questioned their salvation because they couldn't stop sinning. So tell them that they're okay, and to not support this idea that trying harder doesn't always work. So how to talk about it? Talk about it with a lot of love and grace, that there's no condemnation. Because we really believe that the person really must be loved and cared for before anything else. The rebuke must come after love, acceptance, and being heard. Just because of time, I'm sure that there's other things that you say and how you talk about it. But this is, Susette had mentioned this in terms of when is professional help encouraged. We would say that when any of these things are involved, whether that's sexual abuse, when someone is having suicidal thoughts, ideations, if there's a predatory behavior that's happening, that when they already have strong support in their life and it's not helping and they're continuing to struggle, when they're in a huge denial about it, or when you're working with someone and you're uncomfortable with parts of their story, I think that's another good reason to be able to refer.
Can I say something with that, Don?
Yep.
And I think it's important on these kind of subjects to have a therapist friend or colleague that's on call that you can check in with when you feel uncomfortable, because I think that's the best way to really serve your church and your faith community, is to ask for help when you need it, you know?
Yep. And this is an acronym that we use well, let me talk about free assessments. It's called PATHOS. It's the preoccupied, ashamed, treatment, hurt others, out of control, and sad. So the questions that you can ask: do you often find yourself preoccupied with sexual thoughts? Do you hide your sexual behavior from others? Have you ever sought help for sexual behavior you didn't like? Has anyone been hurt emotionally because of your sexual behavior? Do you feel controlled by your sexual desires? And when you have sex, do you feel depressed afterwards? So it's a good kind of different questions to ask. And there's this another online assessment tool called the SAST. It's called the Sexual Addiction Screening Test. And it's a psychological assessment created from 30 years of work in sex addiction. It's a clinical tool I use. And I would use it carefully with people and make sure that unless the resources are in place, if they screen high in the screening test. You can find it under recoveryzone.com. I'm going to skip this, the graph. This is kind of the result of the SAST, but I'll let you read that on your own. I think I just wanted to give some a word on accountability groups. I believe that roughly 95% of accountabilities groups fail. Accessibility is more important than accountability, is what I've learned. Okay, important factors in that there's a safe environment, a belief that one will be accepted, that there's no judgment or guilt, that there's a structure to it, that there's helpful questions, and the leaders will lead with their own vulnerability. And so that's what accessibility would be different than accountability. It's almost like when you have an accountability, and accountability groups also kind of depends, but the ones that I've been a part of, it's more about accounting, right, for your behaviors, and that's really the lead foot. And what I've seen is it's kind of just peer led, and it's the blind leading the blind, and it's more about, I remember you had to pay $5 if you messed up that week. So there's some good support in it, but what I realized is it wasn't helpful long term. So
when I was in college, we had a big group of guys in our college community group small groups, and they would have accountability groups. They would put I think they would put in $10 if they masturbated and $20 if they looked at porn. Yeah. And so they would do that. And then at quarterly, they would go out to dinner with their money. How does that, yeah. So we used to always go, that's interesting. Is that actually changing your behavior? Probably not.
I think it's a helpful step to start talking about it, right? I think especially being able to talk to your friends about it.
Confessing.
Yes, confessing is good, but what we find is the other things are not in place. So these are good accessibility questions. I'll let you read it on your own. I want to, just briefly talk about filtering the computer. When I see someone who is addicted to porn, it's kind of a non-negotiable, because it's almost like if porn is like cocaine, right? And I'm working with a cocaine addict. Why would I? And your phone is on the table, right? Like it's the same thing as having cocaine laying there on the table because of the accessibility. So I'm a big proponent of filters. It's not the answer, right? Because you can also get around anything. But yeah, I think it's a good line of defense. What we're trying to teach you is to when a temptation or an urge comes, to have other thoughts of, oh, do I really want to do this? What's actually happening in my heart? What are my triggers? These are different filtering programs, and so don't forget your cell phone. And also iPhone restrictions. There's a way. I think this is a little outdated, but there's a way that you can restrict your iPhones. I wish we had more time. I'm looking at the time, and we will skip this part in terms of talking with your kids. Would be another section that I wish we just had more time to. How do you talk to your kids about their sexuality and porn? Again, I think maybe I'll stop and move to the last part, and just basically talking about that you become a safe place for them, right? That they would be able to come to you and let your kids feel comfortable talking to you, and your children will make mistakes and be a safe place. All right. There's these ways that Susette and I can help, that we educate staff and volunteers. We do parent of teens seminars.
Mm-hmm.
These are different ways that we can be resourced in many other ways. So we just wanted to maybe open up for questions. Would that be a good segue? Okay. I don't know if there were any questions in the chat.
Yeah, there was a chat question asked, what are some helpful resources you can recommend for parents, for teenagers? So I think you mentioned about some of the ways you can protect from watching porn on computer, but is there some other resources?
Yes. On this slide, there's a resource page. In terms of there's let me see if I can just jump to that. Here we go. I would say Surfing for God would be a good a book, and also Your Brain on Porn, in terms of understanding internet pornography and the science behind it. There's a workbook that I use with teenagers who's dealing with porn. It's not up here, but I can send that to maybe to you, Young, and then I'll and you can give that to that person. That's a really good workbook that's very thorough, and it's not just behavioral management, but it's also talking about some of the roots and what fuels the porn use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any addiction or like compulsive behavior for teens can like affect your mind in a different way than it does for us as adults. So I don't mean to say that to scare anybody, because we can always heal. But it is an important time, I think, preteen to talk about sex, to talk about sexuality, to talk about pornography use and exposure, assuming that your kid may be exposed in middle school or whenever kids start getting phones. So around the time when your kid would start asking you for a phone because all of their classmates have phones, that's when you start talking about internet porn, I would say. Don't you think, Don? Like, yeah, because kids aren't supposed to not be impulsive about stuff. That's just how a kid's brain works. So assuming that they are going to have impulsiveness and that they're going to hunt things out and be curious about things that they don't understand or are curious about, that's part of being a kid. So whatever protection we can put there is good, without fear, but with wisdom.
Yeah, I'm a bigger proponent. My parents did not talk about sex, and so I'm a big proponent of being able to start talking about it in age appropriate ways, and from early on, from 3 to 5, right? And so there's these books, and maybe that would be another good resource. It's more clinical. It doesn't come from a Christian perspective, so you have to kind of filter out your values, but it's been helpful. We have a 13-year-old who we gave a phone to, so it's a constant conversation in our family and with.
Oh, thank you. There's a couple more questions. In marriage relationships, who do you suggest be the keeper of the password for these software filters?
On Diva. What do you think?
Yeah. Ooh.
Not the spouse.
Yeah.
Who else?
Yeah, not the spouse. I think, yeah, I typically, if initially that's important to the spouse as part of the thing, I'm fine with that. But I think what I talk to them about is it really changes the dynamic when the password keeper is the spouse, right? And you can speak to that a little bit more, Susette, but ultimately, their sponsor, mentor, somebody else would, or their kind of accountability person would be the one to have that.
Yeah, so ideally the addict gets into a community of people, and so the spouse might have to have a little bit of that power initially before they're moving into accountability with people and connecting with their therapist and all that. But at some point, the spouse should have the opportunity to be free of being the boss of those things, because it can definitely stir up the trauma response that happens for them.
Thank you. Also, Pastor George asked, is there a referral process for getting help for hurting couples in your ministry organization? And I think this also, are you available to speak to church or youth groups?
Yes.
Yes.
In terms of availability, especially right now, especially on Zoom. I'm still wearing my slippers. I'm ready to go. So yeah, definitely there to help. And in terms of referral sources, Don, maybe you can speak to like ITAP referral and then through SRP too.
Yes. Let me put that up. Yes, we are. Here's additional resources. Yes to both of them. Again, Susette and I work with couples who, whether dealing with betrayal or infidelity, or also sex addiction, we help couples, build that trust and repair their marriages.
And Don's organization, because I'm on my own, but Don's organization has a few therapists that do that as well. And like right now we're working with a couple where Don and I see where I'm the couples therapist, Don's one therapist, and then someone from his organization is the other. So SRP, Soul Restoration Project's a really good resource for that, because there's a lot of counselors there. Yes. And I'm available mostly. I have a therapist brain, so I don't always get back to emails, but I'm as available as I can be without a secretary to answer questions and connect. And I really both care about this. I really, really care about the churches being more healthy in this. So I have a lot of passion for that, and reach out.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's 2 more questions. I know, Don, I know you have to go to another training, but feel free to jump off when you need to, Don. But Susette, if you can answer. Okay, 2 more. It says, how involved can a parent be with their adult kid who is struggling with porn addiction?
Ooh, that's a good question. So like in terms of accountability, or like in terms of still kind of parenting the behavior? Because I could jump down a couple paths on that. You have any thoughts, Don?
Yeah, we just talked about enabling and codependency in my training yesterday, and you really have to make sure that sometimes it's helpful, but sometimes it's not when parents are involved, and it really it kind of depends from one in every situation and the kind of relationship they have. So yeah, I think they could be involved, but I would kind of have to talk to them to talk about clear boundaries, and how they're being helpful, maybe also unhelpful.
That's a good.
Okay.
Yep.
Last question.
I can speak more to that specifically if we need to after, just
Sure.
to specific situation.
Is there hope for someone who is struggling? Have you seen healing and restoration in your practice? And maybe, I think people might want to know, I know everybody's different, but like the duration that they were healed, and
Oh my gosh, we've seen some good stuff. The Lord does really good things in terms of tenderizing people's hearts, even out of the most severe addictions.
Yes. Yeah. There's really a lot of hope. I've been meeting with this one guy. I think this is our 5th year, and from the beginning was, basically became sober, and he was acting out not just in porn, but with anonymous sex with other people, and and he's really recovered, has had long-term sobriety. But it's also very different, right? Individuals, sometimes it takes a while for some people to get long-term sobriety, but there is hope, I believe it, and even in my own life, I've seen that. And so we'll have to jump off, but good to be with all of you.
Thank you, Diva.
thank you so much, Don. It was very powerful, informative, and I think we are all learned something through this, and I think we're going to see a lot of changes in our ministry. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Young. Thanks, Young.
I have one more thing to say about hope. What I've seen with spouses, along with the addicts, and what I've experienced working with a lot of Don's clients too, is if there's an openness and a willingness, where 12-step kind of talks about powerlessness. If there's an acceptance that you're powerless over things and you can move into a different place, hope comes in that, because when you confess your weakness, God moves close to us and reveals himself, and people move close to us too when we confess our weakness, and so much biblically, there's so much hope biblically for this particular issue, and much of that comes when we're starting to battle the shame or getting help with the trauma that maybe an addict had suffered in the past that led to building some of these behaviors. So we really have seen amazing things happen, and a lot of that is, and sometimes it won't happen for a long time, you guys. And like, I'll be working with a wife, and the wife will be frustrated, and I'll be like, we got to set more boundaries. We got to hold him accountable. Like, I'm going to tell Don what he just did so that Don knows, because I'm sure he's hiding it from Don too. We get in this whole system. It's pretty funny. And at some point there is a breakthrough. And at some point my client might calm down and start to work on their own codependency. And at some point Don's client goes, this is not serving me, it's hurting me, and I need freedom from it. And then there will be like an admission and a recovery, and it's such a cool thing to see. But one thing that we've learned is, like, we have to leave it, and we have to, even as therapists, we have to wait for God to work and for him to convict. And we sometimes have to just be with our clients, but not try to make it happen when it's not time yet, and you really see the power of God in it, because he speaks and he'll break someone's heart and then the recovery will not be perfect, but it will really start to move forward. So I have a lot of hope, especially with us who have God in our lives and the Holy Spirit, that I can trust that the Holy Spirit is constantly working on someone else's heart and bringing about change and peace. And if I'm trusting the Holy Spirit and not my own power, God works in crazy ways. So.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Susette, for staying behind a little bit longer to answer maybe a few more questions here. It says, what is the economic social status of most of your clients? And also, is there a website to find specialists nationally if we are not local to point people for counseling, specifically Christian counselors who specialize in this?
Very good. Couple questions. First, in terms of economic, we do find that sex addicts is kind of the addiction happens to all ages, but there's a higher income range. So there's a community of therapists that are basically cash pay, and people will pay a good chunk of money weekly to do this work. But there are resources on all levels of income. So I would recommend, so the organization that certified Dawn as a sex addiction therapist is called ITAP, IITAP. And they have a directory of therapists on their website that are either certified sex addiction therapists or pre-certified, but like not yet certified, but they've done the trainings and are in their supervision work. It takes about a year and a half to get certified. Don did 4 week-long trainings to do his CSAT. He's invested a lot in it. And I like to brag about Don when he's not here. It's more fun when he's here because he gets nervous, but I like to brag about him when he's not here too. So ITAP does that. So I would say that when therapists like us, we're licensed marriage and family therapists, the training process for us pre-licensure, post-grad school is like 3 or 4 years. And you can find a really good therapist that may not be licensed, may not be certified, but is doing the training work. And then that will be an opportunity to get someone at a lower fee if that's something that you need. Many therapists do sliding scales, which means based on your income, we can meet with you at a lower fee. And insurance wise, if you have like private insurance, if you have a PPO plan, many of my clients get reimbursed 60 to 70%. Of course, that requires a certain level of income because you want to put therapy on your credit card and wait to get reimbursed every couple months. So even that doesn't help people that are struggling and maybe don't have the cash or the credit to pay. But ITAP does have resources for lower income people. Don would know more about people that need kind of free resources, but that's something that we can definitely search for you. So you can contact me or him, and I will do some digging for that, especially, anything I can do for pastors that are trying to help their congregations. Does that feel good as an answer? Need more detail? Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's it for our time. And yeah, Don and Susette, they're here and they worked with us in the past. They're here to help. So you can email them directly and they'll direct you, or they'll help you to find answers and bring healing and transformation. So thank you so much, Susette. I think Salt and Pepper had it right when they said, let's talk about sex, baby, right?
Young, nicely done.
Especially in the church. Thank you so much, Susette and Don, for removing the shame and helping us to become the gatekeepers, to be accessible for others to really grow and be healed and transformed through this important topic. Thank you so much. I look forward to actually hearing more from you in the future trainings. It's always a pleasure. Okay, thank you, everybody. For those who are in the discipleship class, we're gonna now go ahead and send you to your breakout room. For everybody else, thank you for joining and have just a blessing weekend.
Thanks for having me, everybody.